so good to see you. Amy and Daniel are normal worship leaders. They're still out sick today. They should be back with us next week, though, hopefully. I said that last week, and then they weren't. So, but next week they should be back with us. So today, you got me. So excited to sing with you, though. So I invite you to stand with us if possible, if you're able to, and we're going to sing a few songs together.
Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart, not be all else to me, save that thou art, thou my best art, by day or by night. was sleeping, thy presence, my life. Be thou my wisdom, and thou my true word. I ever with thee, and thou with me, Lord. Thou my great Father, and I thy true Son. Thou in me dwelling, and I with thee one. Riches I heed not, nor man's empty praise. Thou mine inheritance now and always. Thou and thou only, but first in my heart. High King of heaven, my treasure thou art. High King of heaven, after victory won, may I reach heaven's joys, oh bright heaven's sun. Heart of my own heart, whatever befall, still be my vision, oh ruler of all. Still be my vision, oh ruler of all. Still be my vision, oh ruler of all. Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. We live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes sing worthy. Worthy of every song we could ever sing. Worthy of all the praise we could ever bring. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. We live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me.
right, good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me now. Welcome, everyone, to church. My name is Pastor Kevin. If you're unfamiliar with who I am, I'm the associate pastor here at the church. We're thrilled that you're here with us this morning in worship. Thank you so much for being here. If you're joining us online, thank you for joining us in that way. If you're new with us in person or online, something you can do to help us out is online you can't do this, but in the seat backs in front of you are little connection cards. You can fill the information out on this connection card. You can drop that in the drop boxes in the back of the room. That information just lets our church meet your family's needs a little bit more specifically. So if you want to do that this morning, that would be super helpful. You can also text New EC to 97,000. You can do that online or in person, and that's a digital way to get your information to us so that our church can meet your family's needs. So thank you guys all so much for being here this morning. Happy 4th of July weekend. I'm sure some of you probably were up late last night either doing fireworks or hearing other people do the fireworks. So one of those two things probably happened, but I hope that you all have a safe and fun 4th of July weekend. Thank you so much for being with us this morning when I think a lot of people might be at the lake or might be out on vacation or something like that. Hey, real quick, I want to highlight one of our serving opportunities here within the church. One thing that we have at our church is a safety team, and I'm especially thankful for our safety team. They just keep us safe. I guess that's what safety teams do. And so we just want to say thank you. If you're a part of the safety team, if you know someone on the safety team, we just want to say thank you for keeping us safe. I don't know how to non-awkwardly say that, but thanks. But also, yeah, there you go. We can put our hands together for the safety team. In addition to that, if that's something you're interested in, that you're like, yeah, I want to keep people safe. Safety is fun. On the back of this connection card, it says sign me up. You can just put your name on that and write down there, I want to be on the safety team, or I'm interested in the safety team. You can do that as well. And of course, these can be dropped in the drop boxes in the back of the room as well. Hey, we're going to shift to our offering portion this morning where we give our members an opportunity to worship the Lord in a tangible way. And I want to quickly read one verse as we consider our offering this morning. Proverbs 3:9 says this, "Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the best part of everything you produce." Now, if there's one thing that's true is people find themselves on a wide variety of the income spectrum. At certain times in life that can go up and at certain times in life that can go down. But what God really looks at is not a dollar amount. He looks at our hearts and he looks at what that motivation behind our giving is. So as you give this morning, I want to say thank you so much for your generosity to the church. I've mentioned this last week, but things like our 4th of July celebration, the Archie fireworks that we do, all of these things are made possible through the giving of this congregation. So a few ways that you can give. You have the offering envelopes in the seat backs in front of you. You can give online or you can text any amount to 84321. I'll say a quick prayer and Pastor Jordan will be up here for the message. Lord, we love and honor you this morning. Thank you for your goodness, your love, your mercy, and everything about you, Jesus. I pray that you would speak to us this morning, draw us closer to you. God, as this offering is given, we just pray your richest blessing upon it. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. As Pastor Kevin said, my name is Jordan. I'm the pastor here. I don't normally pull double duty, so if you're like, do you every week sing and preach and everything? You're not a one-man show every week. No. So next week should be back to normal. I said that last week, but I mean it this time. Next week's back to normal, all right? And if it's not, we're not doing worship. I'm done with it. So anyways. All right. Not really. I'll still do it. Happy 4th of July, everybody. I hope you have some fun celebrating tomorrow. Whenever I think about 4th of July, I think of one of my favorite Jim Gaffigan quotes. He's a comedian. He says, I don't normally eat a cheeseburger, a steak, and something else, and a hot dog, but it is the 4th of July. So and that's what I plan on doing tomorrow, is eating a cheeseburger, steak, and a hot dog. Is what the founding fathers would want. That's what he says. So, I got to have energy so I can blow stuff up. It's my favorite Jim Gaffigan bit. It's incredible. All right. Happy 4th of July. We are in our Wise Up series. We're second week of our Wise Up series. We started it last week by defining what wisdom is. And so I encourage you, if you missed last week, to go back and check it out online. It's a great setup for the series. It really sets up wisdom for us. And today we are going to start looking at each attribute that's found in James chapter 3, 13 through 18. And we're going to be looking at the first one that James points out to us, and he tells us that wisdom is pure. It's first of all pure. And we'll get into that in a minute, and we're going to take a look at that through unique lens, through the lens of influence. And so the title of our message today is Wise Up Influence. All right, so we're going to look at
pure wisdom, but through the lens of influence. And the book of James was written by James, Jesus' brother, who's called James the Just, and it was written to churches in a certain area. So it's meant to be read aloud. So in a church like ours, we would have read it aloud on a Sunday morning or whatever, and that's what the letter is. And in this particular passage of James, he is talking about the importance of wisdom. And one of the ways he does that, he talks about how it's important to evaluate our leaders and evaluate those who we allow to influence us and what kind of wisdom they're using. In fact, earlier in the chapter, he says in James 3:1, he says, "Dear brothers and sisters, not many of you should become teachers in the church, for we who teach will be judged more strictly." So everybody who's in Christian leadership should take that passage as a warning, because James is implying right there that God is going to judge Christian leaders on a different level. And so, but he's also tapping into a principle that all of us can understand when we talk about influence, because what he's telling us is this, is if you have influence, your decisions then become more important. When you have influence, your decisions become more important. Let me illustrate it for you this way. Let's say that you are somebody who every once in a while, I know nobody in here is like this, but every once in a while when you're at your house, you let a cuss word slip out. Every once in a while. I know that's none of us here, all right? But every once in a while, you let a cuss word slip out, all right? Now, if you're a single person, that really only affects you, right? If you're in your house and you yell out whatever choice cuss word that Satan may have tempted you with that day, you yell out a cuss word, it really only affects you. You're the only person that heard it. But when you have children, then you have a level of influence. And so if you stub your toe and you yell out that cuss word, well, that cuss word could be repeated on the playground at a friend, say, and then that could spread like wildfire on the cuss word, because maybe that's a cuss word none of the other kids had heard before, and now that's the new word of the day. Or that friend reports them to the teacher, and now you have more trouble. And what happens? You've created ripples with your decision. Why? Because you went from a place where if you're single, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, I'm only influencing me, my decision doesn't really matter. But when your influence rises, your decisions have greater importance. Why? Because there are people that are looking to you. There's people that are looking for your leadership. And now, some of us, we love to downplay our influence. We love to say things like, I'm not a leader. I don't have a voice. People don't really listen to me. But admittedly, you may not have the type of influence that we label as an influencer now, okay? You may not be a fitness guru on TikTok with 1 million followers, okay? That's kind of what we say as influencers now. But you may not fit that definition, but if you're a part of a family, just like we illustrated, you have some level of influence, right? If you are a part of a community where you're a part of the decision-making process, you have some influence. If you have friends who care about your thoughts or your feelings, even just one friend who cares about your thoughts and your feelings and opinions, you have influence. And the truth is that we all have some level of influence. No matter how large or how small, we all have some level of influence. In fact, I remember this was illustrated in high school for me. I had a friend in high school who was a quiet kid. I wouldn't say he had a great level of influence, but he was somebody that we all liked and we all got along with. And there was one particular thing about him in that he wore the same outfit to school every day. For as long as I knew him, he wore the same outfit from middle school all the way through high school. He wore a red shirt and khaki pants. That's what he wore to school every day. And we all liked him and stuff. And so our senior year, we decided we're going to have a day that's dedicated to this one kid. And so we didn't tell him, but we all decided that we were going to dress up in red shirts, red t-shirts, and khaki pants. So the next day at school, it was like we were all that kid there. And so we had I think we got 100 kids to do it. It was a big deal. And it was incredible. And what happened is what? That he didn't even know that he was influencing people. We asked him about it. He said, my wardrobe is just full of khaki pants and red shirts. That's all it is. He didn't know he was influencing people, but he influenced us so much. We all liked him so much that we ended up having a whole day celebrated to him. And the point is that sometimes we don't even realize the level of influence we have, but the truth is that we all have influence. And so if we all have influence, then it's worth considering how we use that influence, right? It's worth considering how we use it, because eventually, especially as we gain influence, because we said with our cursing example, the more influence you have, the more your decisions matter, all right? Uncle Ben in Spider-Man, he might have put it this way. He might have said, with great power comes great responsibility, right? Like that's how he would have said it, all right? We'll put it a little more spiritual today with some wisdom. Here's how we'll say it today. We'll say, influence amplifies the impact of wisdom. Influence amplifies the impact of wisdom. So the more influence you have, the more important the type of wisdom you're using is. And so we talked about last week that we have two types of wisdom. We have earthly wisdom, we have godly wisdom. James talks about both of those in this passage, and the question to the answer of which wisdom are you using becomes increasingly important the more influence you gain. And as a reminder, I want to read that passage. How does James describe earthly wisdom and godly wisdom? Let's read it together. We read it last week. I want to read it again today. Here it is in James 3:13 through 16. It's going to be on the screen for you. It says this: "If you are wise and understand God's ways, prove it by living an honorable life, doing good works with the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you are bitterly jealous and there is selfish ambition in your heart, don't cover up the truth with boasting and lying, for jealousy and selfishness are not God's kind of wisdom. Such things are earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For wherever there is jealousy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and evil of every kind." So what does James tell us about earthly wisdom and godly wisdom? Well, for godly wisdom, he says, here's what your life should look like. It should be honorable. You should live a life of honor. It should be marked by good works, and you should be full of humility. So it should be honorable, marked by good works, full of humility. Well, that's the kind of life I want, right? That's the kind of life that will bring you peace, that will ultimately help you with everything that you do. But I find it interesting when James talks about earthly wisdom, he spends a lot of time talking about what motivates the people who use earthly wisdom. Those who use earthly wisdom are motivated by bitterness. They're motivated by selfish ambition. They're motivated by jealousy. Bitterness, selfish ambition, jealousy. These are the people, these are the leaders, these are the influencers who always look out for number one. They're driven by their need to be better than that other person always, right? Like, I need to be better than them. They're always jealous of other people, striving to prove that they're the best, and as equally important, that everyone else is not the best, right? Like, these are the people that abandon the good of everyone for just their good. They're the people that when the tide rises, they hope it just rises their boat, not everybody's boat, right? Like, deep down, they're bitter. They're consumed with how people see them. They're consumed with the people that have wronged them, and they're intent on proving them wrong, and in the process, making the entire world pay. People that are driven by jealousy, selfishness, and bitterness. Eventually, that's the end of it, right? Because James tells us the end of it will lead to evil and it will lead to destruction. And that's what will happen if it's fully fledged out. If you're driven by these, that's the type of person you become. Now, if you're thinking, Jordan, you just described a boss I once had, or you described the boss I have right now. All right, now you've perked up a little bit because you're like, all right, what do I do? You know what I'm talking about this morning. And I've worked with people over the years, and I've worked for people over the years who have been like this, who have been bosses that, or coworkers that have been motivated by jealousy, by selfish ambition, by bitterness, and that seems to be their main driving forces. And so the questions that we want to answer today is, how do I make sure that when I influence other people, I don't start to become like that? How do I make sure that when I influence other people, I don't use the motivation of jealousy and bitterness and selfish ambition? How do I make sure that I'm influencing people in a way that is good? And then the second question we want to talk about is, how do I identify the good and bad characteristics in those that I allow to influence me? Because just as important as how we influence others is who we allow to influence us. And the key is this: for us to be people and be led by people who influence out of pure motives as opposed to jealousy and selfishness and bitterness and impure motives, right? We want to be people who are led and who lead by pure motives. James 3:17 says, "But the wisdom from above is first of all pure." The wisdom from above is first of all pure. And pure wisdom is simple, and yet it's hard to follow, right? Because here's what pure wisdom is. Pure wisdom is right living driven by right motivations. Right living driven by right motivations. It sounds really nice. It sounds good. But it's hard to always live right and to always be motivated by the right motivations. That is a hard balance to strike. And if you can do it, it's going to be really helpful for you. And so what we want to do today is we want to talk about these two questions. We want to answer these two questions. And so the first one we're going to look at is, how can I make sure that when I influence others, I'm doing so with pure wisdom, with pure motivations? And so the first thing we're going to talk about is those who influence with pure motives are, number one, fueled by the desire to serve. Those who influence with pure motives are, number one, fueled by the desire to serve. Now, oftentimes, the desire to serve is kind of opposite of what our society tells us to do. If you want to get ahead, here's what culture tells us sometimes. Culture will often tell you, if you want to get ahead, you have to be cutthroat. You have to be ruthless. It's a dog-eat-dog-out world out there, and so you need to be the bigger dog, right? That's what culture tells us sometimes. Our culture will tell us sometimes that you have to have selfish ambition to succeed, because if you're not looking out for number one, nobody else is. So you need to make sure that you're doing that. There are even some CEOs that are great about talking about servant leadership, and they talk about it all the time, but then you actually work for their company, and you find out, well, that's just a lot of rhetoric, because here is just as dog-eat-dog world as everywhere else, right? And so there are exceptions to that rule, but oftentimes you hear it, where like they say the right things, but you get into that environment, and you feel like you have to always be putting other people down so that you can succeed. But those with pure motives aren't driven by that. They're driven by the desire to serve other people. They're driven by the desire to serve others, to put others before themselves. And Jesus is the greatest example of this for us. He literally came, why? So the end goal was to give himself up for everyone. Right? Like that was his end goal. He actually says this in Matthew 20, 26 through 28. Let's read it together. He says, "But among you it will be different." He's talking to his disciples. "Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first among you must become your slave. For even the Son of Man, Jesus, came not to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as a ransom for many." So he says that, and then he does it, right? He goes to the cross, and he gives him his life up. And in fact, even the day before, when he has Passover with his disciples, what does Jesus do? Before they eat, he gets down, and he washes their feet. And he lives out the example for them. Hey, if you want to lead, if you want to serve, if you want to lead, if you want to get ahead, if you want to be successful, well, what you need to do first is care for other people. Let's put the desires of other people above you. And I'm going to show you this by washing your feet right now. If you want to lead, if you want to influence well, if you want to have pure motives, you got to be fueled by the desire to serve. And when we look at Jesus' humbling example, hopefully it brings out in us that same desire. Hopefully for us, we start to buck the trend of what our culture sometimes says, where you have to be ruthless and you have to look out just for you, and instead we start to put other people in front of us. And now maybe you're thinking, man, Jordan, you just set the bar really high. I don't know if you realize you just did this, but you said that we all have to be like Jesus now, and that is true. Like that's what we're aiming for. But what's that saying? If you aim for the moon, at least you'll land among the stars. All right, so we want to get close. All right, but we don't always make it there. And that's why this second point is so important, because people who are driven by pure wisdom, they also are quick to confess mistakes. They're quick to confess mistakes. To be pure means to be undefiled. It means to be spotless, and no person can live up to that. However, we can hold that standard by confessing when we don't hit that mark, by saying, hey, I messed up. I didn't make it. I didn't do what I said I was going to do. And if you were to sail across the ocean, all right, you might have heard this illustration before. If you were to sail across the ocean and your course is off by a couple of degrees, sometimes that can actually mean landing in the wrong continent, all right? So here's what the best captains do. The best captains, and I'm sure it's all digitized by now, but the best captains, what they do is they always are correcting, always evaluating, making sure that they stay on course. If they get blown off course a little bit, they get back on course. They're always evaluating. And in the same way, a wise person recognizes the need for constant evaluation and constant correction in their own lives, and they're quick to confess when they realize that they've messed up. That's what people who are driven by pure motives do. And pulling this off requires two things. It requires humility, because you got to be humble enough to admit when you're wrong, and it requires accountability. You have to have people in your life who can point out the things, the areas that you messed up, who have the permission to do that, and so they can help you along the way, people who you actually feel comfortable confessing to. Author and leader Paul David Tripp, he has a book called Lead, where he talks about, you'll never guess it, talks about leadership. It's a book called Lead. And he talks about the need for us to have close friends who can help us see things in us that we can't see things in us, where the places where we have blinders on. And he says this, he says, self-examination is a community project. Self-examination is a community project. And all the spouses said amen, right? Like, it's true, you need some help seeing those areas of your life. Man, when I got married, I did not realize how many areas needed a little bit of shaving down, right? Like it needed a little bit of help on it. And I'm sure that's the same for many of you spouses. Amanda was perfect. She didn't need any help. But I needed a lot. We all need people in our lives that we trust enough to confess to. And then here's the key, who we also give authority to and permission to call us out and tell us about the things that where we messed up, even the things we don't want to hear about, right? Like accountability is twofold. You got to be willing to confess. You also got to be willing to hear it, right? You got to be willing to hear it when somebody helps you with that. In fact, Psalm 141:5 illustrates this perfectly. Here's what it says. Let the godly strike me. It will be a kindness. If they correct me, it is soothing medicine. Don't let me refuse it. What is it saying? It says we all need people in our lives who we trust enough to strike us with kindness, right? To tell us like, hey, I don't know if you realize this, but you're doing this, and I'm telling you because it's going to hurt a lot less if I tell you than if you find out on your own, or it blows up in your face, or somebody that you don't like tells you, right? Like, I'm doing you a kindness, and we all need people in our lives whose correction is like medicine to us. It says, hey, I don't know if you realize this, but you got this limp. You're walking kind of funny, and you need to fix it because it's starting to affect everybody around you because you have influence. You need to make sure you're using it wisely. And so we need people in our lives whose correction for us will be medicine. And then the kicker is this. What does the psalmist say? Don't let me refuse it. You got to accept it. You got to accept it. That's where the humility comes in. Because there we have to humble ourselves enough to confess when we are wrong. So even in our everyday lives, parents, when is the last time you admitted fault to your children? When you messed up and you said, hey, I messed up, and I know I'm mom or I know I'm dad, but I need to tell you I'm sorry, all right, I messed up. And on the other hand, students, children, I don't think there's any children. We have one child in here. She's a little young to be apologizing, but when's the last time that you apologized to your parents? When's the last time you said, hey, mom, dad, I know I messed up. You don't have to tell me. I know I messed up. I want to confess this, all that sort of stuff. Spouses, how often do you confess to one another? How often do you take some time to say, hey, I messed up. I shouldn't have said that way. I shouldn't have done that this way. I'm sorry. Help me move on, right? Like, help me to do it. I have to admit, confession for me is not my favorite part, all right? I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, so I don't really like when I mess up, and unfortunately, started to see this in my kids a little bit. So the other day, Sawyer was having, like, my 3-year-old, he was having some sort of meltdown. He was mad about something, and then during the meltdown, he hit his head on the back of the coffee, or underneath the coffee table. He had rolled underneath the coffee table, hit his head there, and he comes up to me, and then he starts to blame the coffee table for he says, why is that table there? Like, why is that table? I'm like, son, this has been here for a long time. Like, he doesn't want to blame the tantrum. He wants to blame the coffee table. But here's the embarrassing part is that later that same day, I was pulling out of our driveway, and I got a little fender bender, all right? I didn't see a car behind me, and everything's fine. You know, I'm all good, and our car's all good, and their car's all good. But anyways, got a little fender bender, and I kid you not, it took everything within me to not turn to Amanda on the drive and say, like, you distracted me. You were talking to me like, I don't care that I have a rear view camera and eyes. Like, you were talking to me. You know, like I wanted to shift blame so bad. And I told her, I'm like, it's taking everything within me not to do this. And I know it's not your fault, but there's something within me that wants to do it. It's in my kids too. I don't know what I did, but that is happening. We have to have pure motives, though. We got to be quick to confess. We got to not shift blame. We got to have the humility to take it on the chin. All right? Take it on the chin, confess where we've messed up, and move on. That's what people with pure motives do. That's what good influencers do, is they take it on the chin, confess, and move on. And that's what we got to do. And the third one is this. Third characteristic of those who influence with pure motives, they are willing to sacrifice for the benefit of others. They're willing to sacrifice for the benefit of others. Every person with influence will realize at some point that the best thing for the group will be the hardest thing for them. I'm going to say it again. Every person with influence will realize at some point that the best thing for everybody else will be the hardest thing for them. Every parent, every sibling, every coworker, we will all have a moment where we realize that that we can either make two decisions, one that protects us but hurts everyone else, or one that protects everyone else but hurts us. Right? When you have influence, you're going to come into these decisions where you're going to realize, hey, I'm the one who has to take the bullet here. I'm the one who has to hurt, but if I do that, I'm going to protect everyone else. And you see this play out all the time in movies, all right? You see it all the time. There's always that point when the group is trying to get away from whatever thing is chasing them, right? And then one person turns around and says, you guys go ahead, I'm going to hold them off, right? That's what he says. You go ahead, I'm going to hold them off, or you go ahead, I'll buy you some time, you know, and depending on whether they're the main character or not, they either survive or they die, right? Like they make the ultimate sacrifice. We see this all the time in movies, and these scenes can often be emotional. Because especially when the character sacrifices themselves. And I think the reason it's emotional is because we know that this principle is a truth. That those who are willing to sacrifice themselves for the benefit of others, that is something that is truly good. That is something that is truly loving. That's something worth emulating. In fact, Jesus tells us this in John 15:13. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for a friend. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for a friend. So when we see that in the movies, when we see somebody sacrifice it, when we see somebody really give themselves up for the benefit of the group, it brings out emotions in us. Why? Because it's true. There's no greater love than laying down your life for a friend, both literally and when you're influencing people figuratively too, right? I'm going to give myself up so that everyone else can succeed. I'm going to give myself up so that I protect everyone else. It's a good motive to have. It's a pure motive to have. So if you are fueled by the desire to serve, if you're quick to confess, if you're willing to sacrifice for the benefit of others, you're going to be well on your way to influencing with pure motives. Now let's tackle that second question. How can I ensure that the people that I allow to influence me are the people that are driven by pure motives as well? Because we want to make sure that we're not influenced by those who maybe aren't using the best of motives, or at least we know how to handle that. And so we're going to do that by this. We're going to consider the motives of your greatest influences by asking ourselves three questions. The first one is this: are they driven by the needs of others? Are they driven by the needs of others? Are they driven by the needs of others? I saw a sad poll a couple of weeks ago that showed that 2/3 of Americans think that candidates who run for office do so for their own benefit and not the benefit of the community that they serve. 2/3 of Americans think that. And for that reason, many of the people who were polled did not feel influenced by their political leaders, but rather they felt distrusting and disconnected. Now, don't get me wrong. This is not just an American political problem, all right? Every day I'm grateful that we live in a country where we have a vote, right? Like we can affect things and where we have freedom, but this does represent a human problem, a people problem. We see it in politics. We see it in the business world. Fortunately, we see it in many churches. We see it all over the place, where we have a tendency as human beings, when we get power and we get influence, we use that power and influence to fulfill our own needs instead of the needs of others. When we get power and we get influence, we use it to fulfill our own needs instead of the needs of others. We actually have a phrase to describe it. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? Like we use our power not for the benefit of others, but for our own needs. And if leaders aren't careful, this is exactly what happens. Even if they start out with pure motives, like I'm going to change everything, I'm going to make everything good, I'm going to make everything right. Well, sometimes what happens is they get more power and more influence, and then at the end of the day, they see that now they just serve themselves and not other people. And leaders who serve with pure motives, they have a desire to serve other people. So when you evaluate those who have influence in your life, do they love serving more than they crave leading? They love serving more than they crave leading. Do they care more about benefiting themselves or benefiting other people? Are they always looking out for themselves? Are they always just covering their own butts, right? Are they always concerned about making sure that they're covered or that their team is covered? The people they leave is covered, to making sure that everybody else is covered around them. Are they driven more by their needs or the needs of others? All right, that's number one. Number two is this: do they admit fault when they are wrong? So we said that we got to be quick to confess. So when you evaluate leaders, do they admit fault when they are wrong? Trusting someone who never admits fault is a dangerous game to play because it reveals a couple things about their character. It reveals a lack of humility, right? Like they don't want to admit when they're wrong. It reveals an unwillingness to take responsibility. It reveals an unwillingness to put in the work to make things right. And those are dangerous people to follow. And all of those things can lead to issues down the road because all of those things followed out to their end will lead to destruction. We know that. In fact, you can even see this in the type of leaders, with who they surround themselves with. You can find it in who they surround themselves with. So oftentimes they will insulate themselves from criticism. They'll surround themselves with people who only tell them yes, right? Yes men. They surround themselves with people who only tell them the things they want to hear. And in fact, not only do they not own up to their mistakes, but oftentimes these type of leaders cannot even identify the mistakes they have because they've gone so blind to it, and they have so many people around them who only tell them what they want to hear that they don't even see the mistakes anymore. And that is a dangerous place to be, right? Proverbs 29:12 puts it like this. It says, if a ruler pays attention to liars, all his advisors will be wicked. If a ruler pays attention to liars, all his advisors will be wicked. Because what happens is that person is obviously, they're not wanting to admit wrong, and so they have people around them who's not wanting to admit wrong, and they're all trying to make sure that they don't upset the person on top of them. So who does the blame always get shifted to? The person on the very bottom, right? Like the person who cannot blame anybody else. That's what happens when you're in one of those cultures. That's what happens. And so when leaders insulate themselves with people who don't tell them the truth, those environments lead to wickedness. And in fact, at the beginning of this chapter in Proverbs, here's what the author says. It says, whoever stubbornly refuses to accept criticism will suddenly be destroyed beyond recovery. And that is where it leads to. If you won't accept criticism, well, someday those blind spots are going to become so big that they eventually destroy you. We see this happen even on the highest levels, where like somebody had, you wonder, like you hear stories about it, and you're like, how in the world did they stay in leadership? What happens is they surrounded themselves with people who they never were accountable to, who always told them the things they wanted to, until the blind spots got so big, the atrocities got so big that finally the people tore them down, right? And said, no, you can't do this anymore. We see it happen time and time again. And so when you evaluate your influences, ask yourself, do they admit fault? You ever hear them admit fault? Do they own up to their mistakes? Or are they always right and everyone else is always wrong? Ask yourself those questions. And then the third one is this, last one. Would they give up their influence for the sake of those they serve? Would they give up their influence for the sake of those they serve? This one is similar to the questions we asked, but takes it one step further. Would your boss, would your leader, would your influencer give up their influence for the sake of their own team? Would they give up themselves to save everybody else? Do they care more about maintaining power and keeping their power, or doing the right thing? Do they care more about maintaining their power or doing the wise thing? Specifically, James warns us about a leader who uses their power not to help others, but to wield it, right? He warns us about leaders who want to prove their enemies wrong, want to work out their bitterness in the form of revenge, want to sate their jealousy by taking what they want. They want more power so that they can do what they want and they can prove the world wrong. And such a person will never give up power to sacrifice themselves, because bitterness and jealousy and selfish ambition create an appetite for revenge and a need for success that can never be fulfilled, right? That will always want more. Because bitterness leads to a desire for revenge that always wants more. Selfish ambition, jealousy, leads to craving of success that always wants more. You never reach the top, you always want more. So be careful giving that kind of person influence in your life, because they tend to devour everybody around them, given enough time, even those that support them. Once you become expendable, once you become the person they have to blame, they tend to devour you as well. And so today, we have talked a lot about how to be people with pure motives. We've talked about how to evaluate those who lead us. And to close in today, if you can handle it, I got 2 more questions for you. 2 more questions. These are a little more personal. First one is this. In light of what we've talked about, what should I do if, after evaluating the people I've allowed to influence me and lead me, what should I do if I realize that the person that's influencing me doesn't make the cut? Like you described jealousy and selfish ambition and bitterness, and man, people are influencing me, that's what they are. And in fact, you described all the ways that we should be, and they're not those ways. They're the opposite. What should you do? This is a difficult spot to find yourself in, but unfortunately, oftentimes, at least once in life, we will find ourselves in that spot, where we're being led and influenced by somebody like that. And I think there are a couple solutions. The first one is that some situations are just so unhealthy. Some leaders, some influencers are so unhealthy, they're led by such impure motives, that the solution may be to start planning your exit. And it's not every case, but in some cases, the solution may be to start planning your exit. Now, it doesn't have to be a hasty exit. It could be years in the making. But if this is a situation or a person that you've realized is beyond repair, like there is no redemption here, I've tried, it's not working, then an exit is your only solution. It could be as simple as transferring within the company. It could be as drastic as pursuing a new opportunity. It could be whatever your situation is. It doesn't even have to be a work situation. Now, the second solution is this. Most situations are manageable, all right? That's the drastic one I just described. Most situations are manageable. And in those, you don't need to plan your exit, but maybe the best thing you could do is you start to influence the environment around you. Start to use your influence for good. That's the best thing you could do. So lead by example. Start being the things that you want to see. Be the change you want to see, right? Like those are all like cliche phrases, but it really is true. Like if you want to impact your environment, start to lead up, start to lead by example, start to be the change you want to see. All right? Second question is this, and then we're done. What should I do So we asked, hey, I value my leaders. I don't think they make the cut. Now, this may be some of us in here today. What should I do if I feel like I don't make the cut? Like, I've started evaluating my own motives, and like, I'm not sure that I'm being led by pure motives. I think that a lot of times I'm being driven by selfish ambition. I'm being driven by jealousy, even being driven by bitterness sometimes. What should you do if you find out, hey, I'm not making the cut right now? I'm evaluating myself, and I realize I'm not there. I got two solutions for this one, too. The first one is this. Is there an underlying cause for your motivation? Like, why are you being motivated in this way? What is the point? For instance, I used to have a coworker who they would even admit, like, their motivation, they were all of these things. Like, they embodied all these, and their motivation was actually to prove one of their parents wrong. Like they said I couldn't do it, and so I want to do it, and so now they have like a path of destruction now. Why? Because their whole point in life is to succeed as much as they can, to one day hopefully point in the face of their parent and say, you were wrong, I was right. Right? Like, so is there an underlying motivation for you? Is there something that's causing you to act the way you are, and you don't want to be that way, but you realize that's the problem, and you need to work on that underlying motivation? The second one is this. So if you find you're in that place, and there's no really underlying motivations, it's just, this is who I am. It's what I've always been. I don't know why. Maybe you were influenced like that as a kid, and you grew up into this person or whatever. Second one is this. Start small. Try to gradually change your motives to pure motives. So for instance, at some point, go out of your way to serve somebody else rather than always being the one who's served. Go out of your way to do that. Find one person that you can be accountable with, and then give them permission to call you out on your stuff, right? Like, give them permission to call you out. Take a moment, just one moment, to own up to something that you did maybe in the past, and tell your coworker, like, hey, I messed up here, and I know it was a long time ago, but I want to tell you this because I never owned up to it. Like, just start small. Do small things, and here's what will happen. Those small decisions over time to be led by pure motives, over time they're going to build, they're going to build, they're going to build. It's one decision after another, just pure motive decision after pure motive decision. You're not going to be perfect, but one day in the future you're going to look back and you're going to realize, hey, the majority of my decisions now are not out of selfishness or bitterness or jealousy. They're out of pure motives. And what you've done is you've taken small steps every day, and now you've begun to be somebody who's led by pure motives. And if you do that, here's what I promise you will happen. If you do that, it's going to pay huge dividends for you, because we know that it's not going to lead to despair. It's going to lead to good things in your life. It's going to bring peace. It's going to bring things in your life that you didn't have before. We know that if you do that, it's going to be good. And then we know that if enough of us do that, if enough of us start to influence with pure motives, we could see a big change in our environments all around us. And that's what we want. We want to live in a community, we want to live in a world where the majority of us are driven by pure motives. And those pure motives are leading to peace instead of destruction. Let's pray today. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for our time together. Lord, I thank you for the wisdom that comes from your word. Lord, this morning as we're evaluating our influences and our own influence, God, I pray that you would just help us to be humble in evaluating those. Lord, I pray for those that realize that they're being influenced by people who maybe aren't being led by pure motives. God, I pray that you would give them a clear course of action on what they should do. And for those of us, God, who realize that we struggle with being led by impure motives, God, I pray that you would begin to transform our hearts, transform our minds, and help us to begin to make small decisions to be led by pure wisdom. Lord, we love you. We surrender everything we have to you. We thank you for today. In your name I pray. Amen. Amen. Well, thank you all so much. Hope you have a great 4th of July tomorrow, and we'll see you all next week.